Hi, Kinesiology 3010. Welcome to our directions lecture for the Qualitative Analysis of Human Movement project. So I'm going to give you a little breakdown of what the qualitative analysis is and give you some directions on how to complete your project, your group project. If you haven't contacted your group mates, please do so and start preparing your lab or your qualitative analysis draft lab is due on November 8th. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but that's just going to be a basic breakdown of the movement you plan to analyze, as well as your critical elements and your rubric. Okay, so what a qualitative analysis is to identify key elements or critical elements within a movement that are termed towards improving quality, efficiency, effectiveness. So this is a subjective process where we judge movement based on quality. So how efficient the movement is, how smooth the movement is, how well it is, how well that task is performed compared to what we would say is a criteria for the best standard that it could be, that task could be achieved. So we do this when we're looking at form or technique, or in subjective sports like diving, gymnastics, where the quality of movement is key. We're going to learn about how to actively analyze and judge, make a measurement, a qualitative measurement, and an evaluation or a judgment based on the quality of that movement and the standards for quality that we create or that we get from other sources. Okay. So there's 4 steps to developing your qualitative analysis. There's the preparation phase, the observation, the evaluation phase, and then the intervention phase. So the preparation phase is learning about the activity, identifying critical features, so movements within the body and how they should be performed. Think about the goals of the movement, knowledge of the performers, okay, the level of the performer, so the criteria for high quality movement for a 10-year-old compared to a 21-year-old compared to a 65-year-old is all going to be different based on their knowledge of the movement and their expertise. How you would judge a high school athlete compared to a collegiate athlete compared to a professional athlete, compared to the average Joe who plays that sport on the weekends. We have to have a basis of who we're analyzing, the population, the goals of the movement, and then we have to develop strategies to observe that movement to create our judgment. Okay, so we complete the preparation phase. This is really what we're doing in this first draft of your project. So you're identifying the activity, the population, the critical features, and giving yourself a strategy for how you're going to implement the observation phase. So this is finding vantage points or areas from where you can view that movement, how often you're going to, or how many number of times you're going to observe the movement. For the sake of our class, we're going to use 2 vantage points and 2 observations at a minimum. And then how could you possibly add extended observations? This can be over time. If you're in maybe a coaching setting, you're looking at movement day after day after day and looking at progress of the quality. So this is our observation phase. This is looking how we're going to view that movement. Then we move to the evaluation or diagnosis phase. Okay, this is where we have observed the movement and now we're making a judgment based on the correctness of the critical features. So we've identified what is critical to achieve that movement or that task, and now we're giving a evaluation or a judgment based on the correctness of those features. So how well they met the criteria. Okay, where were their strengths and weaknesses within the movements? We need to find those weaknesses. because prioritizing the weaknesses allows us to build up from the floor. If we can bring the floor up of the quality, we're going to improve the overall quality of that movement. And then we have to have a rationale for why we picked those movements and those weaknesses in order to improve the quality of movement, which comes in the intervention phase. So this intervention phase is where we give feedback, guidance. We take those critical features that we know and we turn them into cues or feedback cues to help our client, our athlete, our mover modify their task or modify their movement so that they can improve its quality. And then this is a cycle. We run back through these over and over and over. We're going to do a very systematic observation where we're going to go through each of these steps in detail for your project. But you would do this every day in your career. So say you're a physical therapist and you're teaching exercise. You need to know the activity or the exercise. You've identified what is important for that exercise. You know the technique or the form necessary to safely and correctly complete that task. You have your goal, you have your population, and now you observe, you move around the room, you're finding different vantage points. You're watching them perform over a number of repetitions and over an extended period of time, maybe set to set, day to day, week to week, month to month. And you're giving constant evaluations and feedback, where we give cues and corrections to that movement. Where we find strengths, we give them feedback that yes, you did well within this aspect of the task. For the weaknesses, we cue on, hey, maybe try this, alter your movement in this way for this new modification to improve the quality of your movement. So we're constantly giving feedback in the intervention portion so that we can improve the quality of movement, and then we have them perform the movement again and again and again and go through this cycle. Okay, the key here is to start with knowledge of the movement. So please, for your presentation, make sure it's a movement that at least one of your group members is somewhat of an expert in or has experience within that movement. If you've never played volleyball, don't choose a volleyball serve as the movement you plan to analyze. Okay, pick a movement that someone, at least one person in your group, is knowledgeable about. Hopefully one where all of you are knowledgeable in. And then you'll identify critical elements of the movement. We'll go into a little bit detail of what those are. Make sure that you know the knowledge of the performers. Okay, what level are these individuals injured? Are they just general population? Are they competitive athletes? Are they recreational athletes? Are they older adults? Okay, who are the performers? Who's the population? And then create your observation strategies. This is really what we're doing. This preparation phase is what we're doing for our draft. Okay, for your draft, I want you to go through this and create this preparation so that when you perform your observations, you are ready to actually evaluate the movements and then give your feedback to your movers. Okay, when we identify critical elements, we're looking at what are the most important aspects of the movement. What is critical? What is necessary within this movement to achieve the task or achieve the movement goal to the best quality possible? That means safety, efficiency, and effectiveness. Okay. Most of us, we probably think of this as optimal technique or good form. But realistically, we're breaking this down all the way down in detail to what is necessary to perform high quality movement within the task, the movement task that we're going to perform within this project or within whatever aspect of kinesiology you're in. You're going to be looking at movements. You make sure that you know the critical elements, what is necessary, or what is good form, great form, proficient form, excellent form, so that you can progress your clients, your athletes, your students to that point. Okay. The three keys, three aspects to critical elements are safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. So safety means that we are reducing risk to the mover, the performer. We've lowered the risk lower the chance of injury. Effectiveness is how well we can accomplish that goal. So they can move in the most beautiful way or the most graceful way, but if it doesn't accomplish the goal, it is an ineffective movement strategy for that task. So we need to be able to accomplish the movement goal. And efficiency is using the lowest amount of energy to achieve that goal. So how can we conserve energy, conserve movement, conserve whatever we need to conserve in order to achieve the goal as safely and effectively as possible with the least amount of energy expenditure possible. Okay. When we look at effectiveness and efficiency, effectiveness is focusing on the goal. Efficiency is how much effort or how much energy we have to put in to achieve that goal. If we can lower the energy need, we have a more efficient movement. If we accomplish the task more proficiently, we have more effectiveness within that movement quality. So always tie back your critical elements to the component of safety, effectiveness, and efficiency. So within your rubric, you should have indicators of movement should be done this way to decrease the risk of injury because, to improve effectiveness because, to improve efficiency because. Make sure we always have those details. If we don't have those details, you are not able to accurately evaluate your critical elements within the movement. Okay, so how do we identify these? Maybe we're looking at this movement. How do we find what is necessary or what is a critical element? We have to look at each component of the body, okay, or each segment. So we break down the body into a head, arm, leg, foot, trunk, depending on the movement, looking at the areas of the body that are moving and required to move. Maybe they're producing force, maybe they're absorbing force, maybe they're creating movement, maybe they're stopping movement. Maybe we're sequencing movement like in a throw where we have rotations that move up to the hand through in this whipping motion of rotation. Okay, whatever is necessary, we have to look through those and analyze what is safe, effective, and efficient within each segment of the body and within the whole body. Okay. Here we're looking at a slow motion video of a pitcher performing their windup and pitch. So here we're looking at the preparation phase of the throw, okay, where he's starting to create his forward movement. Okay, we see here when his foot lands on the ground, he's performing the execution phase of the movement, where the arm comes forward and through, and then there's the follow-through portion of the movement, where the arm comes through and the rear leg rotates around in front of the front leg. So we'll watch that video again. We're looking at the preparation phase, or the initial preparation he has here. So this is the windup. Okay, performing high knee, we can look at the critical elements here, looking at foot position, knee position, hip position, arm position, trunk position, and head position. So where are his eyes? Okay, where are his hands? Where are his feet? Okay, during the initial execution phase in this throw, when he begins to run down the mound, we can look at this as in a component here of what is he doing with his arms? Okay, how well is he separating his arms? How well is he beginning to create rotation with his hips? Where are his eyes focused? Okay, during the execution phase, we can look at the rotation. Okay, how well does he rotate his hips before he rotates his shoulders? How well do his shoulders rotate before his arm comes through? Okay, as his arm's going back or his shoulders coming forward? And then looking at the follow-through phase, how well does his arm come in a smooth arm path after release? How well does he decelerate his arm? And how well does he become ready for the next possible play? Because in a sport like baseball, after you follow through of a pitch, you have to be ready for another ball to possibly come at you. So we're looking at those critical elements, at each piece of the throw. So we'll look here at our execution phase. Okay, so this is where he begins to create that rotation from his lower half and translate it up all the way through the ball in his hand. Okay, so here we're looking at stepping with the opposite foot. What direction is his foot? Is his front foot directed towards his target? How does he bring his arm back into external rotation or into layback with his throw? So how smooth is he moving his arm back into that cocked position? Okay, how well does he rotate his hips and his trunk? Do his hips and his trunk rotate together as one, or do they separate where the hips sequence first, shoulders sequence second, which would be an optimal movement? It would have a poor movement if we're moving the hips and the trunk together at the same time. Okay, that's not going to generate as much rotational energy up through towards the arm, towards the shoulder, and towards the hand. Okay, and then looking at the follow through. Okay, how well does he finally release the ball and decelerate his arm? So we need to look at these three phases. You may have different names for these three phases within your movement, but the first part should be your preparation phase. So this is where the mover is setting themselves up to perform a movement. Okay, they're getting into position to complete the task. So we need to look, I should see this within your critical elements. Each phase and the optimal movement. Okay, so you think about your critical elements as a perfect 10 out of 10 or 5 out of 5 on our movement analysis. So what is the leg action during the preparation? What is optimal? Trunk action, head action, arm action. Based on your movement, you will analyze different segments, but I do recommend at least, at a minimum, leg action, hip, trunk, shoulder, and head, okay, or arm and shoulder. Make sure we're focusing on body components that are necessary to complete the movement goal, and make sure that we're at minimum including the legs, the trunk, head, and the arm. If you add more, okay, maybe foot position is extremely necessary. Add foot position as one of your body components. Okay, that could be some piece that is necessary to have an effective, safe, and efficient movement pattern. And we need to create a critical element for each phase. What is optimal? What must occur for safe, effective, and efficient movement within each of these body positions, within each of these phases of movement? Okay, so here's an example here. So during the preparation phase, the feet need to be in line with the target. So we saw in the video earlier, his front foot was in line with the target that he was throwing to. The trunk must be straight vertical. Okay, we can't have too much extension. We can't have too much flexion. Okay, we can't have too much side bending. We need to have a straight trunk. Shoulders on the non-throwing side has to be pointed towards the target during the preparation of a throw. If that front shoulder has already moved away from the target, the chances of an accurate throw or an effective throw go down. Okay, the shoulder or the arms, okay, the arm has to be extended. Okay, with the shoulder has to be with the elbow up to less than 90 degrees. So that's that elbow angle. It has to be within 90 degrees. Outside of 90 degrees is a less safe movement pattern. Okay, because that creates a greater stress at the ligaments in the elbow. So looking at that, we have to be within 90 degrees, slightly less than 90 degrees, with the arm abducted or brought off the body. Okay, and then finally, the head, the eyes need to be on the target. Okay, if we're not focusing on the target, we have a less chance for accuracy, which limits the effectiveness of that movement. So make sure we're always tying these back to safety, effectiveness, and efficiency, okay, with all of our movements. Okay, or all of our critical elements within the movement. Okay, so now that we've determined the critical elements, what do we do next? We find vantage points. So we create positions for the observation. Okay, we need to determine how many vantage points or how many points of view we're going to use, how many trials we're going to observe, how we're going to focus on that observation. Is it going to be a narrow focus, a wider focus? And then how we plan to observe or score when we're watching this movement. So the vantage point is the optimal position for observation. We should view movements from more than one vantage point. For this class or for this project, you'll need a minimum of 2 vantage points per mover or per performer per movement. So we need to be able to see from different views. And we need to look at the optimal angles for the planes of motion. Okay. If the movement is very frontal plane, so it's going side to side, we want to use a frontal plane view. So we need to look at the body from maybe the anterior side or the posterior side. If it's a very sagittal plane, very forward-backward movement, we'll need to have a side vantage point to look at the body from the sagittal plane or within the sagittal plane. For a transverse plane movement, if you can view it from the top, that's optimal. Less than optimal, you want to use a diagonal angle for rotational movements. So using some kind of off axis, so not sagittal, not frontal, some kind of diagonal axis somewhere in between to view those transverse plane movements so you can get a better vantage point of the rotational components that are occurring within that movement. So how they're spinning, think about a longitudinal axis, we're spinning top to bottom, rotating this way. So I do recommend make sure that you look at the planes of movement, get at least one view within the plane, and then have another kind of diagonal view or angled view to see the additional components of the movement, because some components are fit into each plane. It's best to view the movement from the plane the movement is in. For example, here we're looking at breathing during the butterfly. Okay, we can look at here from a frontal plane view, we can see him coming up, but it's very difficult to see what the arms are doing. When we look in from a sagittal plane, we can see more of what's going on with the arms from that lateral view. Okay, we can see a lot here from the diagonal view. We don't see much from a posterior view or behind view. So finding vantage points where you can get clear visuals of what is going on or how to see each component. Play around with it, try different angles. The vantage points where you can see the most critical elements within one view is the best vantage point. And we need to find 2 at a minimum for this project. Okay, I do suggest that you use slow motion if you can. It makes it much easier to analyze those critical elements. Use 2 different planes of view, so 2 different vantage points, and film more than one time for each angle. So multiple films, don't just have them do it once. Perform multiple trials. Okay, that's where you can see what is a consistent, or think of it as a mean movement or an average movement. What are they most often doing or most frequently doing within each of those critical elements, so you can give the best evaluation and then the best feedback to intervene and change that movement. The step 3 is our evaluation. This is where we're looking for strengths and weaknesses. We're comparing our critical elements, our optimal pieces of movement, to what the mover did. Within this evaluation, we need to create a scoring rubric. We'll talk about that in the next slide. We need to identify what is the best for the strengths of the movement and the weaknesses. So what pieces were done extremely well, what pieces or critical elements were performed extremely poorly. And then create corrections or cues about those critical elements that can improve the movement. Okay, so let's use our baseball example. For example, if his front shoulder was pointed away from his target too soon. Okay, we see that. We could say that we could cue this individual to keep that shoulder pointed towards their target longer. Okay, that could be your cue. Okay, keep your front shoulder going forward longer. It might work, it might not, but that is a correction that could improve the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the safety of that movement. Okay, and with these scoring rubrics that I talked about earlier, we're creating a rating scale that can tell us more, give us a stronger measurement, a numerical value to the quality of their movement. Okay, these have to be objective, so it has to be a clear standard that must be met to achieve a score, and we're going to evaluate the quality through this. When we're developing these rubrics, okay, we have to look at the purpose, look at the critical elements, what is necessary. Okay, look at what is necessary for the movement, so the safety components, effectiveness components, efficiency components, the critical elements, what pieces have to be done to achieve those 3 quality pieces. Okay, what level of ability is this mover? Okay, is this a novice mover? Is this an intermediate mover, advanced mover, master mover? And then describe what is the criteria for each level. So if this is met, then this score is given. For example, in a tennis forehand, for a score of 3 or a good score, a good technique, proper grip, waiting in a ready position is acceptable, but not perfect. So they've done it well, but not perfect. Above average consistency in presenting, stepping forward and swinging the racket. Okay, so above average, so they're doing good, but they're not perfect, they're not the best. Making contact with power. Okay, so they're swinging hard, making contact forcefully, hitting the ball. The racket moves from low to high. Okay, this would be an example of what is good. We're looking at things that are necessary for effectiveness, think power, consistency, or within the consistency piece, we're looking at efficiency and effectiveness. The ready position, or looking at the stepping forward and swinging the racket, that could go into effectiveness, efficiency, and safety. So we need to have pieces that fall into each of these, as opposed to, say, a score of 1 or a poor score, incorrect grip and no ready position. So there are major errors within how they are preparing for this forehand. Okay, swing is incorrect, cannot make contact consistently. Okay, so these fall into incorrect, which is very ineffective. This poor ready position could put them at a risk for safety. They may get injured because they're in a poor position to start. And efficiency, if they're not moving well, not moving consistently well, they're going to waste a lot of energy, waste a lot of movement. So I recommend using a 4 to 5 point scale for your grading rubrics. So 4 to 5 point scale. You can choose which, but make sure that you have the numerical score, a description of that score, and what is necessary to achieve a leveled score of 5, 4, 3, 2, or 1. What is required? Make it as clear as possible. And then step 4, intervention. At the end of your observation, you need to give feedback. So you've scored your individual, maybe they were excellent, and then they scored poorly in some other components. Give them feedback on what they scored poorly in. Give them some kind of guidance, some kind of cues that could help them progress their movement, so that they can practice and improve the quality of their movement. So you do need an intervention. There's no point in making an observation of a movement without an intervention from our standpoint. If you're a physical therapist, performance coach, physical education teacher, we want safe, effective, and efficient movement. How we do that is by watching movement and then giving some kind of feedback to help them improve the quality of their movement. Okay, so in total, the purpose of this project is to help you analyze human movement and practice this process. And what you need to do is select a movement or sport skill. I recommend choosing more sport skills, something more dynamic. Don't just pick an exercise. A simple exercise, make it a little bit more dynamic of a movement. Identify the critical features. Create an evaluation of 4 to 5 levels like the rubric that you viewed. Videotape all of your group members performing the movement from a minimum of 2 angles. Okay, it's recommended that you have more, but a minimum of 2. Okay, watch those video performance and evaluate each member's performance. Each group member is going to analyze another group member, so you are never analyzing your own movement for this project. Okay, so analyze someone else's movement. Okay, and then you'll do all of this and create a voiced over PowerPoint presentation of your movements with embedded videos of yourself performing the movements and each group member performing the movements with voiceovers of how you scored these individuals. I'll create another or give you another link to how to voice over a PowerPoint. Really what you need to do to voice over the PowerPoint is go to Insert Audio. You can record directly into PowerPoint. You can also add a voiced file into the PowerPoint, but you do need to use standard desktop PowerPoint for this project. If you don't have access to that, then contact me separately and we can figure out how to still complete the project. You may use some other form of slideshow based presentation, but preferably use PowerPoint. Okay, here is the assessment rubric. So this is how you will be graded based on this rubric. So what is necessary for you to achieve these scores? This is actually these scores are updated. This is not, it's out of 50 points. But all group members must be videotaped, clear views, good angles, things like that. Make sure that you have your critical features and why they are critical features. See why is scored more, is weighted more than just listing the critical features. So make sure you say why you've chosen these. Okay. Video your movement. Video your movement. Explain why you chose these angles. Have clear criteria for each skill level. Make sure that the criteria is sensitive enough to differentiate skills. So don't just use the same criteria, alter the criteria so that it has a specific description that is different from each of them. So what makes them different? Present all of these within your PowerPoint. Explain why you scored each individual based on that rubric, and give some kind of feedback to how they can improve their movement now that you've analyzed it. Okay, and then just some others. Everybody's within the PowerPoint. If there's an issue with group member participation, there will be a feedback questionnaire for everyone on how your group members did. So if you are one of those students who is not contributing, that will negatively affect your grade. Okay, because I do take those peer feedback into account when it comes to your score. Okay, so please work with each other. Okay, so create the critical elements. Make sure that your rubric is sensitive enough to differentiate groups. And make sure that you have your example or how you would view the movements within your draft. So your draft should just have 1 and 2. So critical elements and your grading rubric for your movement. This is what I need for your lab, for your draft. That way I can help you through maybe giving you some feedback with your critical elements and your rubric before you begin observing those movements. Okay, and then final for the project, you need to evaluate each group member's video clips from multiple angles and present those with your evaluation and intervention within your PowerPoint. Okay, this date is incorrect on this, but the correct date is available on your syllabus. All right, and this will be due on Canvas. Okay, we have some alterations now. All right, so here's some example movements. So things like throwing, basketball, golf, volleyball, tennis, soccer. I recommend using a sports skill. Pick a sports skill. Don't just pick an exercise. If for some reason you have very specific exercise that you and your group want to analyze, please clear that through me before you start creating anything. But if it's a sports skill, you should be completely fine. If there is an issue, I will give you feedback on that issue within your draft, and you'll have the chance to resubmit the draft. Right? Thank you very much for watching, and get started on your project.